Hey guys, as most of you would already know, Japanese society and Japanese people have a reputation for being incredibly polite, and of course it's absolutely true. We've made videos that have talked about this before, and it's one of the reasons that being in Japan is such a pleasure, is that Japanese society and Japanese people are so incredibly polite. And recently we received a message from somebody who was telling us about a circumstance that they'd encountered in Japan and how they felt the person had been incredibly rude to them. And it was understandable that that person could feel the way they did, because probably in most countries outside Japan that particular circumstance would have been considered to be rude. But basically what was happening was a cultural difference. Now, just a couple of things. First of all, there is the occasional person that you might encounter. If you come to Japan for a holiday, you probably won't notice, but if you stay in Japan long enough, you might encounter the occasional rude person. It's really rare. It is really rare, but occasionally there is some rude person in the traffic, or there's occasionally some rude person somewhere who might stare or say something or do something that even by Japanese standards is considered rude. They do exist, but it is really rare. So the reason we're making this video is that quite often we'll experience something in Japan that if we've grown up in another country, it's quite possible that that thing might make us feel like the person's being rude to us. And as a natural reaction to that, we feel offended. Now, there's a couple of reasons we made this video. First one is to give you some examples of where these things might feel rude to you, but in actual fact they're not, and also to talk about our reactions to them. So just a few examples where to start. There's all sorts of examples. One might be, for example, usually Japanese people don't touch each other or other people, so usually there's not a lot of touching goes on here. As most of you guys would already know, there's bowing and there's usually no shaking of hands, usually bowing, and not a lot of touching goes on here, even amongst close friends and family members, usually. However, if you find yourself in a circumstance where there's lots of people in a small space, a little bit of pushing is not uncommon. So if you're, and I'm not talking about the extreme either, there's a video that's been on the internet for years of train staff pushing people into a train carriage. That's really rare. That's been a popular video, but it's not really rare. That's pretty rare. That's an extreme example. But that sort of thing, but it's more likely that you'll be standing on the train, you pull up at a train station and the train's really busy and it's crowded, and somebody needs to get to the exit, and usually they'll just push their way through. And sometimes they'll say sumimasen, but quite often people just push their way through. So you'll feel yourself getting pushed. That happens a bit, and it can happen other places as well. If you're at a festival or somewhere where there's a lot of people in a small space and all trying to get to something, all trying to get to the same place or get to the same thing, quite often there can be a bit of pushing there, and it can become as quite a surprise, because usually in Japan nobody touches you, and you find yourself in this circumstance and suddenly people are pushing all over the place, and that can happen. And crowd behaviour here is quite strange sometimes. Another one is, it's really quite common, it's a strange one, but it's quite common to go up in an escalator or go through into an entrance to some place and have someone standing right there in the entrance or right at the top of the escalator, just standing there looking around. It's sort of like sometimes it can be almost like a sort of a lack of situational awareness or something going on, but it's quite common. The other ones, there's others, probably more personal ones are the ones that are probably more difficult. We've talked in a previous video about laughing, and that's a difficult one, is that if you have some situation where you embarrass yourself, where you say the wrong Japanese word and embarrass yourself, or you drop something or break something or slip over or some other way embarrass yourself, it's really common for Japanese people to laugh at you, and we explained that on the other video. That's another example of this. Another one is, a lot of the politeness in Japanese society has been sort of established over hundreds and hundreds of years. So it's really programmed in. So the way it works is that, you know, in this circumstance you say this and do this, and in this circumstance you say this and do this. This could well be the case with manners and politeness, maybe all around the world. Maybe everybody's the same. It's that in this circumstance, this is the polite thing to say. But it seems to be even stronger in Japan, that there's this really set way of responding to different circumstances and what you say and what you do. And what can sometimes happen is, if there's a circumstance that people haven't encountered before, quite often here they don't know how to react to it. And that can sometimes result in a strange reaction, or sometimes no reaction at all. One common example that people quite commonly encounter is, it doesn't matter how good your Japanese is, if there are some people who just cannot deal with talking to a foreigner. So there's some Japanese people who just cannot deal with talking to a foreigner, and it's quite often just simply that they never have before. So if you go to some little country town or something and sit down in a cafe or a restaurant or something, and a staff member comes to take your order, it's quite possible that that person has never been face to face with a foreigner in their life. And it's quite common, and quite often you can see it in the face, is sort of this glazed, sort of like a phased look. You can sometimes see a phased look, and what can sometimes happen is, you can ask for something very simply in very good Japanese, with good pronunciation and good grammar and the right words, and you can ask for something very politely in Japanese, and the staff member might look at you and then look straight at the Japanese person who's with you and say, "I'm sorry, what did he say? Or what did she say?" And this one is really common, and it can be frustrating, because sometimes it's just staff in a restaurant, but other times it can be more important things. You're trying to do something important, like buy a house, or do something important like that, buy a car, and the staff can do this. You know, you can walk in, you're buying the car, you're the customer, you've got the money, and you ask the salespeople a question, and they've never talked to a foreigner before, so they just sort of turn to the person that you're with and say, "What can we do for you?" And it can feel really rude and really frustrating. And I'm not talking about once, it can happen again and again with the same person. So you ask them a question and they answer to the person that you're with, which means they understood the question, but they answer to the Japanese person that you're with. And then you ask another question, they answer to the Japanese person that you're with. And they just don't answer to you, they answer to the person that you're with, which can be really frustrating and can feel really rude, because it's like, hey, you're understanding my questions, but you're talking to the person I'm with instead of talking to me. You're assuming that I won't understand your answer. And it's strange, because it's obvious that you're understanding what they're saying, because of your questions are fitting in with what they just said. So it's a strange situation where they're understanding what you're saying, you're understanding what they're saying, but they're still talking to the Japanese person that you're with. This is really common. People who have been in Japan long term that speak Japanese well will often talk about this. It's a very frustrating situation. And there's a lot like this. There's other ones where, if a common one is, people want to maintain the harmony here. So if there's a situation where you ask a question where it's a difficult question to answer, or it makes them uncomfortable to answer, quite often they won't answer. And that can be frustrating as well. Email's a good example of that. If you ask somebody a question here by email, and it's a difficult question for them, it's like the answer is difficult because they've got to say no, or they've got to tell you that it's not possible, or something like that. It's quite common that you won't get an answer. And often face to face, that's the case too, that you ask a question and you don't get an answer. So there's other examples of this is that encountering a foreigner that they've never encountered a foreigner before, that happens. That can lead to people staring a little bit, and that can feel rude as well, that people stare a little bit when we're not used to that in our own country probably. And quite often, because this place is so polite and non-aggressive, in some other countries, if you stare at someone or push someone in a train or something, they might just turn around and bop you on the nose, you know, and that's not really a risk here. So it's really interesting. That means that there is some behaviours here that you probably wouldn't get in other countries, but you get here, and staring is one. Usually people maybe between 20 and 50 years old probably don't do it, but younger people will do it, and older people will often do it. They'll just stare. And again, it feels rude, but it's quite possible that person's never seen a foreigner face to face before. An extension of that no fear of getting bopped on the nose thing is because Japanese culture has the different status things going on, so that you know, unfortunately there's still the male-female status thing, and there's a whole heap age status thing going on, which means if you get older men usually feel, well, it's true in Japanese society, older men have higher status here, usually, depending on a whole heap of other variables, but that can often lead to older men treating younger people younger than them, in a fairly sort of condescending way. And there's a lot of examples for this. A common one in our little town is there's tiny little windy streets, and when you encounter someone coming the other way, whoever's closest to a sort of a place they can back up to usually backs up. But it's quite common to have an older man coming the other way, and you end up meeting face to face, and the older man just doesn't move, just stops his car and sits there and doesn't even try, and he might be a few meters from a place he could back up into, and you might be a long way where you can back up into, and he'll just sit there. That's another thing foreigners sometimes talk about here too, is older men that have been abrupt to them or rude to them or whatever. And again, it's just because those guys are used to people sort of folding to them or listening to them or going with what they say, because here the older men are usually of higher status. So again, we're just reporting these things. We don't make them happen, you know. So there's that as well. And again, you know, quite a lot of other countries that wouldn't happen, because if the older man, you know, face to face, if the older man insulted the younger man, it's quite possible that the younger man might retaliate in some way. But here, that's not really a risk. So they're often a bit like that. Sometimes, not always, of course. So all these things are big generalizations. They're just warnings, because what we're trying to get across is that these sorts of things can be difficult to deal with. And again, if you're only here for a short period of time for a holiday, likely it's not going to be an issue. But if you're here long term, these things can come up, and they can come up regularly. And these sort of things can wear you down, because if it happens once, it could be sort of a novelty or interesting, sort of amusing. But when it happens continually, it can become tiresome. And even though we might know that these things happen and accept that, oh, it's a cultural thing, when they happen and happen and happen, when you've grown up in another country, the feeling that these things can bring on, because quite often it can give you a sense of injustice, or a sense of you can feel offended by some of these things. There's a lot of other examples that no doubt when this video is over, will be like, oh, I forgot about that example. But you'll encounter your own examples here of this, and the key is, if you feel that someone's being rude to you here, it's really important to keep in mind that it's possibly just a cultural difference, and it more than likely is. I'd suggest that depending on what culture you come from, you know, 99% of the time, if you feel there's some sort of rudeness happening, someone's being rude to you, that 99% of the time it's just a cultural difference. And in Japanese culture, they're not being rude. You know, not answering and not giving direct answers, and a lot of those examples are just normal reactions to things here, as far as maintaining the harmony, you know, which leads to the next point. Whether a person really is being rude to you, or whether it's just a cultural difference and you feel they're being rude but they're really not, either way doesn't matter. Our reaction has to be harmonious. So whether it's irrelevant whether that person really is being rude, and it's obvious that they're being rude, and Japanese people think they're being rude too, it's irrelevant. Our reaction is what's relevant, and this is a real tricky thing to do. It doesn't matter how rude you feel someone's being to you here, you have to be polite back. And there's a few reasons for it. You will be judged independently of what they did. Now, in a lot of cultures, if someone's rude to you and you're rude to them back, then that's perfectly acceptable. And in actual fact, our laws are often like that. If someone hits you and you hit them back, then That's cool, and that's often our cultures are like that, aren't they? If someone does the wrong thing to us and we do the same thing back to them, well, that's fair enough, isn't it? That's the way we see it. And in Japan, it's different. In Japan, it's different. If one person does the wrong thing, that's not an excuse for the other person to do the right thing and to do the wrong thing. And if someone's rude to you and you're rude back, you'll be seen almost worse than the first person. And it can lead to all sorts of problems. It can lead to all sorts of problems because the society here and the people here expect you not to react negatively to rudeness. And you'll see examples of this. But on a previous video, we talked once about being in a Kyudo dojo and an old man coming in, and he picked up a piece of paper and still got no idea what it was about, but there was something on a piece of paper that he read that really upset him, and he went off, and he was being loud and yelling and really losing his mind and really getting angry and really telling everybody off. And then he went out of the dojo and slammed the door behind him. It's one of the few examples that we've got of anybody getting angry in Japan. And out he went and slammed the door behind him, and off he went. And not one person in that place said anything about it. After he'd gone, everybody just continued doing whatever they'd been doing as if it never happened. So people that were practicing Kyudo, the archery, continued to practice. The people that were sitting around drinking green tea and chatting continued to chat, and nobody said a word about it. And that's exactly because the whole aim of the exercise here is to maintain what? Maintain the harmony. And reacting to any sort of negativity like that just makes it worse. It just increases the unpleasantness of the situation. So the main aim of the focus all the time here is to maintain the harmony. And if anything upsets the harmony, like someone being rude to you, then reacting to that is only going to escalate it. And what you have to do is pretend like nothing happened. And this, for a lot of people coming from other cultures, this can be extremely difficult. And particularly when these sort of things, when we're sitting calmly talking about it, it's sort of, oh yeah, I could do that. But the problem is if you're tired and, you know, you've had a bad day, and then out of nowhere this happens to you, and it's the 5th time that it's happened to you, and it might be the same person that's done the same thing to you before, it can be really difficult. That your natural reaction is to go, oh, come on, you know, come on, you rude person, you know, what are you saying that? And it's really can be really difficult. But what we have to do is we just have to smile and let it go and not react. And you know, there's always people when we make videos like this that say, no, I'm going to say what I think. I'm not Japanese. I'm going to say what I think, and I'm going to tell them anyone's rude to me. I'm going to tell them, and any old man pushes me, I'm going to push him back, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And that's your choice, and you can do that if you want to. But like all our how-to videos, this one is just pointing out to you the fact that if you react negatively to someone, if you think someone's being rude to you and you react negatively to that, you will get the consequences. And there's a lot of examples of this where the other people around will judge you based on your reaction to it. And they're not going to say, oh no, that's fair enough, because, you know, Suzuki was rude to him and then he was rude back to him. Or, you know, Suzuki pushed him and he pushed him back. They won't do that. They won't make excuses for you. They'll just go, aha, he's a rude foreigner. You know, or even without the foreigner part, they'll just think you're rude. And they'll lose respect for you, and doors can close. And this is why we make a lot of these how-to videos. Is the problem with these sorts of things is doors slam shut. If you react badly to things or do the wrong thing here, nobody, and again, they're trying to maintain harmony as well. So if you react badly, the other people around will still be smiling. And if you say, he was rude to me, they'll agree with you. They'll say, yes, he was rude. Even if he wasn't. Even if he wasn't, and that's a huge trap, because what happens is foreigners come here, someone says something to them, and they react and go, hey, don't you talk to me like that. You don't talk to me like that. You show me, you know, be more polite to me. That's rude. And then they say to their Japanese friend, he was rude to me, wasn't he? And the Japanese friend says, yes, he was. And they're just maintaining the harmony. They are just agreeing with you because they want to maintain the harmony. Now, maybe that guy was rude to you, maybe he wasn't, but they're really feeling uncomfortable that you reacted badly. And then a week later, when they're having a party, they may not invite you because they don't trust you anymore. If there's some situation develops, you might react poorly and embarrass them or ruin the harmony, so you might not get an invitation to that party next week. You wouldn't know it though. They'll still be smiling at you and being nice to you, but inside they're thinking, oh no. And then, you know, a week later they're working out who to invite to their party, and someone says, let's invite John, and they go, oh no, it's okay, I think, and they just leave you out of it. You don't get an invitation. That's what happens. Or, you know, the company that they work for needs to employ a foreigner for something, and they're thinking, oh, should I recommend him? And then they think, oh no, better not. Because the way Japanese society works is if they invite you or recommend you for something and then you react poorly to something and embarrass everybody or ruin the harmony, that makes them look bad. So the bottom line, is, first of all, understand if you're in Japan and you feel that someone's being rude to you, understand that it's possible that they are, but it's more than likely that it's just a cultural difference. Even though you think that maybe you've been all around the world and anywhere in the world it would be considered to be rude what that person just said or what that person just did, there's a good chance, even though in the rest of the world it might be considered rude, in Japan there's a good chance it might not be, that it's considered to be perfectly normal. And even if they are being rude, it doesn't matter. Your reaction has to be the same. It has to be totally neutral. As with all these things, all we have to do is try to maintain the harmony. And if you do anything else, you might think that you have a right to, which is a common thing that people from other countries might think. I've got a right to say what I think. You will be the one that will probably pay the price in the long run. So the best thing you can do is just do whatever's required to maintain the harmony. Just keep smiling. And conversely to what we said previously, if there's a bad situation and someone's not fair to you or not polite to you, and you're polite back and you're very nice back and very civilized back, the other people around will have more respect for you as a result. And that's probably the case all around the world, right? But even more so in Japan. That if someone does treat you badly or is rude to you or something else, and you are really nice to them and you react really positively to them and you do the right thing, then two things could happen. One thing is that person might end up turning around and being nice to you. It's possible. But more importantly, the other people around will then have more respect for you and more trust in you, and they will set you apart. Because quite often people here have a bit of an image that foreigners are rude, and it's often because of the cultural difference. And if you show you can take it, if you show that you can take a bit of uncomfortable feeling and not show it and contain your reaction and behave like an adult is the way that they see it. People that react emotionally in difficult situations are seen as being children, are seen as being immature children. And that in a difficult situation, if you can control yourself and behave really politely and civilized, then you're seen as a mature adult and a person who's got their self together and can be trusted and respected and can be invited to parties and given the job at work and is a worthwhile person. So, as difficult as that may be. So anyway, hopefully this will help somebody. Hopefully at some stage somebody will have a situation where this is of some use to them. More videos coming soon.